My name is Joe Van Loon. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Audit Wizard. So today I'm going to be talking a little bit about security. My talk is called A Developer's Guide to Self-Auditing, Easy Methods and Strategies to Not Get Hacked. So if you're a developer wondering what you need to do to stay secure or get the most out of an audit you're going to get, this is the right place. All right, a little bit about me. I worked as a security engineer in Web 2 for about 8 years. Worked at some large tech companies, did a lot of security reviews in that time, did some research as well on empowering developers to be better at security, to self-audit, and now I'm building a platform for auditors and devs to easily analyze the security of smart contracts. All right, so why self-audit? I like to think of security as a probability function. You basically have an expected value based on the controls you put in place. The standard calculus in security is risk equals probability times impact. When you sum your security risks and apply your layers of defense, you get an expected value of the security of your app, of your smart contracts. So this value can never be zero, but ultimately it's your goal to get that number as small as possible and keep it there. There's also a model in risk management called the Swiss cheese model. I have a nice little graphic here of that. But essentially, each layer of defense you have has holes in it. When you stack them up, those holes ideally will not overlap. You get enough layers and you've got a pretty good set of layers of defense, right? Ideally, those layers are complementary and they can reduce the overall holes in the system. So when thinking about the security of your project, your goal is to take a series of approaches that ideally have their own unique probability distribution, so the holes don't line up. Audits are great, and you can get multiple audits and sort of stack those up, but there's a lot of other stuff you need to do that have their own sort of unique probability distribution that can also have a good impact. And security doesn't start and end with an audit. Security doesn't start and end with an audit. It's an ongoing process. You should practice it at every stage of development. So being critical of audits, they are definitely not a silver bullet. I have a nice graphic here you can see of the cumulative amount lost over time by audit status. So the orange line is unaudited, the blue line is audited, and you can see that blue line is not zero. So why is that? I'll start by saying the incentive for auditors is they're not necessarily aligned with yours, right? An audit firm their goal is to produce a report that's satisfactory, that does a good job, it's the best effort, and then move on to the next one. Your goal is to not get hacked. Auditors have a reputation to uphold, but no auditor is perfect, right? Even big name firms have experienced hacks on contracts they've audited. Some vulnerabilities are quite complex. It's totally understandable that not every auditor would catch every vulnerability. So one experiment you can run is if you get an audit from two different firms, you'll find that the reports they produce are not exactly identical. So as I said, stacking up audits is a good standard practice. It's a standard advice to get 2 or 3 audits at least, but you should also augment those layers of security with your own. And also, in addition to audits from firms, you should explore things like audit contests, bounty programs. Those can help fill in the gaps as well. All right, so if you're prepping for an audit, my first piece of advice is to make the job of your auditors as hard as possible. You want them to struggle to find vulnerabilities. because they absolutely do not want to turn in a sparse report. So if you can get all the low-hanging fruit out of the way, if you can front-run essentially the auditors on the work that they're going to do, you're going to force them to look a little bit deeper to produce a meaningful report. Auditors hate to turn in, a set of 5 informational vulnerabilities, and that's it. Doesn't look good on them. So they're going to dig deeper and deeper until they find something that they're proud of. So the number one thing here is that if you have insecure code, you're going to get an audit. They're going to find all the vulnerabilities. Then they're going to say, okay, fix them, come back for round 2, right? Usually that means getting another audit. Sometimes it's part of the initial audit deal, but if your code is very insecure, you're going to be wasting a lot of time. And even so, if you have that time, auditors are going to be spending their effort working on that low-hanging fruit that you could have easily gotten out of the way instead of doing more complex research on what could really go wrong with some of the more involved systems in your smart contracts. So getting that low-hanging fruit out of the way is a really good way to make audits worth your money. The other thing I'll say is auditors, the first thing they're going to do is read through your docs. They're going to run your tests. They're going to fork your tests, and then they're going to kind of modify them and play around with them. So having good docs, good tests will save auditors tons of time. It will leave more time for them to really think critically about the review, to explore more complex vulnerabilities, those hidden criticals, which are really the things you're after. You don't want one of those popping up, 2-3 years down the line after you've gotten 4 or so audits that no one ever caught it. And essentially you can think of, you're hiring auditors for one thing, their critical thinking, security expertise. If you can get as much of that overhead of the audit process out of the way, they can focus on that one thing that they're good at. If they have to write a bunch of boilerplate tests because you have no tests, that's a waste of their time, that's a waste of your money. My last tip here is to make use of the tools out there, static code analysis tools. They're usually limited in value because they target low-hanging fruit, but if you can't pass the static code analysis audit, then your code is not ready for a human audit. So it's a good step 1. All right, so auditing yourself. If you don't want to get an audit or if you're not ready for an audit, there's still a lot you can do. And actually, developers and auditor skill sets overlap a lot more than you might think. As a professional developer, you're actually not far from the skill set of an auditor. You only need to take the right approach to reasoning about security in order to successfully perform an audit. One of the key things there is threat modeling. If you've never heard that term before, that's okay. I have a slide for it coming up. We'll go through it in detail. But it's one of the most powerful tools or techniques an auditor puts to use. So you want to at least do some basic threat modeling, some basic assessment of your own security from different perspectives. Think like an outsider, think like an attacker, not just someone who's been hammering away at this code for a year or so. Threat modeling involves thinking of anything and everything that can go wrong, and very importantly, also includes things you believe you've already mitigated. So the key thing there is to challenge your assumptions. Trust but verify is what we say. So one example that I have here of thinking of everything that can go wrong and testing that. Viper had a particularly nasty bug in their reentrancy guard due to it not working in some of the cases that they hadn't tested. So essentially, the reentrancy guard variable was scoped to single functions. And if you re-entered in a contract in a separate function, that was actually valid. The reentrancy guard wouldn't block that. So what went wrong? Viper didn't challenge the assumption of their reentrancy guard, working for multifunction reentrancies. So things can go very wrong if you make assumptions and don't verify them. So one other tip I have here for any dev team out there is that putting at least 5% of someone on your team's time to think about security is much, much better than 0%. So that's always been my advice. Actually, my advice is to assign someone to be sort of the security champion of the project. But if you're moving fast and you have a lot of development overhead, you can't sacrifice a lot of time, but you could sacrifice at least 5% to not get hacked. And then last thing I'll recommend here, again, is another set of tools for fuzz testing. So if you're not aware of what fuzz testing is, essentially is brute forcing your contracts with different inputs to see what the behavior is like. It's a pretty good way to reason about or to, detect security issues. And the main thing is it doesn't take a lot of human overhead. It's kind of point and shoot. There's some things you can do to set it up and optimize it, but you're mostly relying on a computer to brute force this for you. So it means you don't have to sacrifice a lot of dev resources. Okay, so threat modeling. When I first started as an auditor in the Web 2 space, I would often ask the question in my reviews, how do I know that I'm done? How do I know that I found everything? What if I missed something? No one really had a good answer, right? But the technique for addressing that problem is having a very exhaustive threat model. As I said before, threat modeling is just imagining anything and everything that can go wrong with security. And it's much easier to reason about the completeness of a security review at a high level than to sort of aimlessly bug hunt. So there's a ton of strategies for threat modeling, but the basics you need to know are the CIA triad. That's confidentiality, integrity, availability. All risks can sort of be categorized into one of these three buckets. To further expand on that, we have the STRIDE model, and I have a nice diagram here of that. You can see what it stands for there, but essentially it gives you a good lens to model a potential attacker through and to think of the various vulnerabilities that might be present, right? You could think of how your assets might be tampered with, how a user might spoof another user, how information disclosure might happen, right? So you can use those models to help you build up a significant threat model to think about everything that could have gone wrong. Lastly, every auditor relies pretty heavily on a vocabulary of sorts of common security vulnerabilities. Something they do day in and day out is look for these vulnerabilities. They know them pretty well, and they start to, get to know the common ones and know what they should look for first. Obviously, as a developer, you don't have that vocabulary built up. A good place to start with that is just looking at the top 10 smart contract vulnerabilities and asking yourself, how could I be vulnerable to this? Obviously, there's more than 10 that you want to look at, but the top 10 is a good place to start. All right. So OPSEC. I'm sure we've all seen quite a few OPSEC failures in Web3 so far. The main thing here is security is broader than just code. You can have the most secure code in the world, deploy it with, a certain wallet and lose that wallet, right? Or, someone gets access to your keys and it's all over. So you can't think of security in just one domain. You have to think of it more holistically. So there's a lot to cover in OPSEC. I think that's its own talk in itself, but there's a few key things we can take away. A few basic principles. One, the principle of least privilege, right? So for all of your assets, just asking yourself, who really needs to have access to this, the ability to do this thing? Anyone that doesn't absolutely need that, if you could survive having taken it away, then do so. And then multi-party approvals. So you can have one bad actor on your team, you could have one compromised laptop, one malicious employee, if you will, but you significantly reduce the probability of them being able to do something when you pair them up with others in the organization, right? So if you want to do a smart contract deployment, rather than everyone on the team being able to just do that, you need 3 to 5 people to agree on it, and they'll all be a filter for anything that goes wrong. 2FA saves lives. SMS account recovery, as we've seen, kills. Even Vitalik is not immune from this, right? I think we've seen on Twitter or X quite a few times now where people's accounts got hacked. How does that happen? Almost all the time it's because they have their phone number tied to their account, they have some sort of SMS account recovery mechanism, they get SIM swapped, then their account's gone. So it's all about permissions, right? Think critically about your permissions, review them often. Look at things like Discord, for example. Discord servers actually have very complex sets of permissions, easy to mess it up, but make sure you're looking at everything that your company does, that your project does, making sure you're secure there. All right. So I only had 20 minutes for this talk. There is so much more I would love to cover, so much more you need to know, but hopefully that was a good primer for the basics so you know where you need to dig into further. A few takeaways I wanted to highlight. One, assign one person on your team at least to champion security thoughts, initiatives. Even as little as 5% of their time goes a long way. And then empower them to actually make changes that matter. 2, audit your own code, right? Especially before a professional audit. No one knows your code better than you. You have all the context. You just need to employ some auditing techniques, and you'll be better than any other auditor out there. Maintain security as you develop. So don't wait till the very end to start thinking about security, because you'll have dug yourself many holes that are difficult to dig out of. Always follow good OPSEC principles. Definitely include that in your review. Don't just go get a smart contract audit and think you're totally secure. You need to think holistically about everything that could go wrong. And lastly, check out Audit Wizard. So I have a small clip that I'm going to show you, but Audit Wizard is a platform for auditing your own smart contracts, reasoning about security. It can help you with everything I've talked about today. Thank you for listening. I have a few links up here, a few things I recommend. Looking at OWASP has some really good resources. The Wikipedia entry for Stride, oddly enough, does a really good job of detailing threat modeling and a couple other ones there. And I wanted to end in showing you just a little bit in the last minute or so of Audit Wizard. Essentially, it's the platform that we've been building at Audit Wizard, and you can load your contracts in there. You can run all sorts of different tools. We're in an open beta right now, so feel free to come test it out. Give us your feedback. We're adding to it continuously. We have many, many more features ahead of us, and definitely looking for your feedback to know what's important to you. All right, that's my talk. Thank you, everyone.